while other 10-year-olds were out there crying over scraped knees or just stressing about what game they were going to play tomorrow. Were you sitting in the living room holding your breath? Were you listening to the exact cadence of footsteps on the stairs trying to manage your parents' emotions or taking on responsibilities that were way, way beyond your years? You see, you weren't just a child. You were kind of forced to be a tiny adult. So let me ask you directly. Were you the peacemaker at home? The protector? Maybe even the live-in therapist? Often adults looked at kids in this role and just showered them with praise. You were probably told, "Oh, you're so mature for your age," or "You're such an old soul." And, being a kid hungry for love, you probably pinned those compliments to your chest like medals of honor. But here's the reality. While you were getting all this praise for growing up early, you were silently carrying this massive, completely invisible burden. In family psychology, there's actually a clinical term for this exact dynamic. It's called parentification. Think of a child as a seed, right? To grow, it means the soil and water of basic emotional safety. A kid has a fundamental right to just be carefree, to make mistakes, and to depend on their parents to catch them if the sky falls. Well, parentification takes that natural order and flips it completely upside down. Suddenly, the child is the one providing the safety. Now, it's important to note that not all parentification looks exactly the same. Psychologists divide it into two main types. First up is instrumental parentification. This is when you had to do the heavy physical household chores, cook the meals, or manage family logistics at a really young age. It's exhausting, sure, but it actually causes less deep psychological harm if the parents still show appreciation for the effort. But then we have emotional parentification, and this one is far more dangerous. This is the scenario where a 7-year-old essentially becomes the therapist for their 35-year-old mother, or they act as the referee every time their parents get into an argument. The generational boundaries completely collapse. And when those boundaries collapse, the child learns a pretty brutal lesson. The internal logic becomes, my needs don't matter. My parents' emotions come first. I only have value when I'm being useful. Let's be real here. This isn't just a child being mature or responsible. We need to call it what it truly is. It's the absolute theft of a childhood. Which brings us to the core of today's explainer, the science of the parentified brain. What's actually going on in there? So what exactly happens to the biological wiring of a child's brain when they're constantly monitoring unpredictable parents? Because these effects don't just magically disappear when you turn 18. They physically shape your nervous system into deeply ingrained biological survival patterns. For kids in safe environments, their nervous systems spend most of the time in a relaxed, playful state. But if you're always wondering, hey, what mood is mom in today? Or is dad gonna explode? Your brain had to adapt. The amygdala, which is your brain's fear center, basically starts working overtime. It gets locked into a permanent fight or flight mode. You end up developing this neurological survival pattern where your nervous system literally forgets how to truly relax. And because of that overactive amygdala, you develop what I like to call a hypervigilant emotional radar. It's wild. You can walk into a room, and within maybe 2 seconds, your brain automatically calculates exactly who's happy, who's angry, and the precise tension of the atmosphere. You don't even need to look around. Your body just automatically tightens at a door slam, a heavy sigh, or even a specific kind of footstep. It's honestly an amazing skill if you're a hostage negotiator, but man, it is an exhausting way to live a normal everyday life. This level of hypervigilance alters your fundamental perception of the world. Think about it. A normal brain interprets peace and quiet as safe. Makes sense, right? But a parentified brain views silence as highly suspicious, dangerous even. To the hypervigilant mind, calmness feels like a trap. Silence isn't peaceful, it's just the calm before the storm. And that leads us to a really painful paradox. You essentially become biologically addicted to chaos. When life feels a little too smooth, you start to feel restless and anxious, purely because peace feels like danger to your nervous system. So what does your brain do? It actively creates a crisis through worry. This pushes your levels of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, right back up to what feels familiar. It's crazy to think about, but you literally feel neurologically safer and more in control when you're worried than when you're relaxed. So that's the biology. Let's move into our next section, hyperindependence and the loss of flow. Now that we understand the underlying science, let's look at how these deeply ingrained survival patterns actually show up in our adult lives. We're going to break down the childhood formula that forged this trauma scar. Think back. When you were little, what happened when you asked for help? Maybe you were ignored, which just made you feel like a burden. Or maybe you were heavily criticized. Over time, your brain created a simple formula. Asking for help equals disappointment. And to protect yourself from that disappointment, you built a totally isolated fortress around yourself. This childhood formula translates directly into a tough adult reality. The mantra becomes, I'd rather just do it myself than ask for help. You know the type. You become the person carrying 4 incredibly heavy grocery bags up to a 5th-floor walk-up all by yourself, hands absolutely shaking in pain. And when a neighbor asks if you need a hand, you instantly shoot back, nope, I'm fine, with this stubborn, brave face. This hyper-independence sounds like a superhero trait, but in reality, letting someone in just feels way too dangerous. It's really just a form of extreme self-isolation. Keeping yourself in this isolated, hypervigilant state costs you something incredibly precious. You lose the ability to experience what psychology calls flow. As defined by Professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, flow is that pure, joyful absorption in an activity where you completely lose track of time. Think of a kid totally engrossed in building a sandcastle. But for a mind that grew up way too fast, sinking into that kind of joy requires feeling safe. And since you never feel truly safe, flow becomes a forbidden luxury. Why does it feel forbidden? Because you're basically a security guard who never ever gets to clock out. Even when you're supposed to be on vacation or just watching a movie on the couch, a background process in your brain is on high alert, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You lose the ability to do something just for the sheer fun of it. Everything has to have a purpose or a rigid plan. You aren't actually experiencing play, you're just managing your play, with color-coded to-do lists to make sure it's perfect, and more importantly, safe. Which brings us to something I call the therapist-friend paradox. When you can't connect with your own joy, you often choose to connect with other people's pain just to feel useful. You naturally attract wounded people because, well, fixing them is your comfort zone. Your emotional intelligence is shockingly high. Remember, it was a survival tool you built to read others. But the brutal paradox here is that you understand the pain of literally everyone else except your own. You'll happily sit there giving hours of thoughtful advice to a friend, but then you'll hide in the bathroom with the water running full blast just so no one hears your own tears. Okay, so how do we fix this? Let's get into how to heal the parentified brain. How exactly do we heal a wound made up of thousands of tiny moments where you just had to carry too much? Well, here is the counterintuitive secret. The solution isn't about trying harder. It's actually about learning how to try less. We're going to walk through 3 actionable steps to unlearn these ingrained survival patterns. Because right now, your inner child is essentially trapped in this code of false adulthood, frozen at the exact age they were forced to grow up. These steps are designed to finally let that kid rest. Step 1 is absolutely crucial, giving yourself permission to grieve your past self. You're carrying around a very real, very heavy sadness for the 8 or 10-year-old who really should have been allowed to be a little messy. They should have been allowed to make dumb mistakes, to be a bit irresponsible, and to know they'd still be unconditionally loved anyway. You really don't have to feel grateful for the fact that you grew up too fast. Openly mourning that lost childhood is the necessary first step. Step 2? Well, step 2 is probably the hardest. Right now, you're like an ambulance with the siren constantly blaring, rushing around to save everyone else, but never pulling over for basic maintenance. You have to practice being a complete beginner at receiving. The next time someone offers you help, instead of throwing out your automatic rejection, I want you to force yourself to pause for just 3 seconds. Swallow that pride and say, yes, actually, that would help. You have to prove to your own brain that you aren't just a tireless problem-solving machine. And finally, step 3. This is the 15 minutes of no responsibility rule. I challenge you to carve out 15 minutes every single day to do something completely pointless. Seriously, scribble on a piece of paper, lie flat on the living room floor, play a silly game on your phone. And when that familiar wave of guilt shows up, just smile at it. You're actively training your brain that the world isn't going to end and things are actually still okay, even when you completely let go of control. The child who grew up too fast did an absolutely incredible job holding everything together, but let's be honest, they are exhausted. True adulthood isn't about doing every single thing on your own. It's about having the courage to finally drop that heavy backpack, take off that suffocating armor of the perfect adult, and simply say, I'm tired and I just need a hug. So as you head into tomorrow, I want to leave you with this question. What are you going to do with your 15 minutes of pure freedom? And who are you finally going to allow to help you carry the load?